All right. A very warm welcome to everyone to this webinar number 11 of the Inspiration webinar series of the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. We have seen over the past 10 webinars quite a few interesting topics being covered right across from plant-based dairy, plant-based seafood, cell culture media, cultivated meat, bioreactors, a bunch of stuff that we are focusing on in the three key technology areas of plant-based, fermentation, and cultivated meat, eggs, and dairy in our country. And really glad here to have you all with us on this topic, specifically focusing on indigenous crops and plant-based ingredients as a category. Some of you know that entrepreneurs, researchers face a lot of problem with ingredients, especially indigenous ingredients, where a lot of work is currently being not done upon in terms of its applications in plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy products, and other feedstock as well. At the same time, there are a lot of opportunities for utilizing these grains. We keep talking about it as part of our indigenous crops initiative. We keep talking about it as part of our focus on doubling farmers' incomes and, tapping into the biodiversity that exists in a country like India with, produce of so much different kind of agro commodities all over India. We export a lot of it, but we don't necessarily make a lot of value-added products from it. And, its applications in the smart protein sector are also relatively limited, but it's a huge opportunity area as we keep talking about it. So today we have two expert speakers with us, Dr. Saikat Muzumdar, who's at ICRISAT and has done fantastic work in the past on millets and on other indigenous crops in terms of understanding their properties and in terms of understanding their applications, growing them. So we have a short presentation from him to begin with in the session. And then we have Mr. Chirak Sabanani, who's an entrepreneur. You might have heard him in the past through some of the resources that I already shared with you. He runs a company called Supplant Foods and also focuses on ingredient functionality as a core kind of principle of working on in his company and building on applications of different protein and other non-protein ingredients in terms of applications in plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, and he has been doing that for the past couple of years and more. And he's been working on creating a venture, establishing relationships across different markets and taking different B2B products to market. So he has a lot of insights on those areas. So he'll be giving a small talk for the next for the remainder of 30 minutes, and in the last 20-30 minutes we'll open it up for the Q&A. But as usual, feel free to submit all your Q&As or comments through the chat function or through the Q&A function. We'll be recording the session and uploading it on our GFI India YouTube handle so that all of you can rewatch it post the session is over. But feel free to make the best use of this time by asking any questions that might come along as they're presenting during the session. Once again, this wouldn't have been possible without our sponsors, title sponsor, Capri Global, key sponsor, NICE and Alchem Foundation, organizing partner, CIECO, our supporting partners from academia and research kind of an ecosystem in India, BioRack, NIFTM, Sign, Able, CCamp, AICCCMB, IIT Madras Bioincubator, and a lot of our partners who are building the smart protein ecosystem alongside GFI India from the VC incubation and acceleration space, Blue Horizon, DSD Consumer Partners, Thought for Food, Fixie, Brink, Ankur Capital, Exilor, ProVeg Incubator, Omnivore, Agni, Huddle, Big Idea Ventures. So it's been quite exciting to have all of these partners on board who would be able to help you post challenge and, in your phases 3 and 4 and your demo day. So as you know, in track 1 in plant-based innovation, we have the use of indigenous crops and applications in plant-based meat. So you'll have to understand what kind of different crops might be used for better texturization, better protein properties, better functionality in meat. At the same time, there's a specific problem statement RFP in track 1 focusing on use of indigenous crops to replicate dairy protein, which is quite exciting. Millet as a source of protein per se. Last year, a few people worked on millets, indigenous crops, some legumes, in terms of the applications in different plant-based dairy, like plant-based paneer, plant-based yogurt, etc. So quite exciting to see those innovations coming in this year as well. At the same time, you can think about indigenous crops for applications in, two-part egg white and egg yolk. So a two-part egg, which is also quite exciting. At the same time, and B2C applications for improved functionality in existing plant-based meat, eggs, dairy, and seafood products from indigenous crops is also a key area of focus. So that is something Yeah, my bad. I think the internet dropped off for a second, so apologies for that. Um, so So my apologies for the internet dropping off. Let me really quickly talk about the remainder of RFPs where we'll see today's session being useful. So the one with eggs for sure, and then obviously any end product applications in meat, eggs, and dairy from the use of indigenous crops for their functional properties is something you'll learn from today's session. At least gets insights to that bit. And you also have interactive where you're looking at creating ventures, right? Whether they're B2B ventures, like the one, for example, Chirak focuses on through supplant foods, or you're looking to do something in the B2C space, you'll have to obviously think about where your sourcing is going to happen, where your ingredients are going to come from. So I guess no matter what you're kind of thinking to do, ingredients and the base raw material and the functionality of protein and other non-protein ingredients from these crops is quite important for you to focus on. So plant-based milk, plant-based egg, plant-based seafood, plant-based meat, and any other such white space opportunity area within the value chain of plant-based foods. I think you'll have to think about these crops and their kind of application. Like I said, we'll take questions in the last 20 minutes, but feel free to submit them throughout the session. And with this, without further delay, I'd love to invite over Dr. Saika to switch on his camera and share his slides to begin with. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Saika.
Yeah, thank you, Shardul. And am I audible?
Can't hear you.
Am I audible now? Hello. Hello.
No, I think you'll have to rejoin. You're not able to hear, right, Dr. Saika?
I can hear you, Dr. Saika.
You can hear me, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Loud and clear?
I can hear you now. Yeah, please go.
Okay, Shardul.
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, GFI, for giving me this opportunity. And ICRISAT has been working with GFI over the last 1.5 years. And we have been working especially on the indigenous millets and trying to understand how we could leverage them for getting into the smart food or the smart protein related areas. And briefly about ICRISAT, we are a non-profit political international agriculture research organization based out of Hyderabad, and we work on the dryland crops, which are sorghum, pearl millet, pigeon pea, chickpea, groundnut, and finger millet. And as you can see, these are the indigenous crops, indigenous to the Indian subcontinent and also across the Africa, the drylands of Africa. And our aim is to see how we could use these crops and make them into mainstream ingredients or products using out of them, so that we could address the farmer concerns, especially the poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, which is linked to their ability to actually market these crops and to create a demand pull for these crops so that they are able to sustain, because nothing else grows in these drylands. And with climate change, these are identified as crops of the future, which will actually sustain the climate change. So looking at the dryland cereals, as you can see here, the dryland cereals, sorghum and millets. ICRISAT is the major repository of these dryland cereals, and studies are being conducted at ICRISAT to profile these accessions. We have around 21,000 accessions from 50 countries for pearl millet, 37,000 accessions from 91 countries for sorghum. As you can see here on the photographs, you can see the diversity of these crops in terms of their height, in terms of their color, in terms of their nutritional profile, the grain size, etc. And this is where the opportunity lies for us to delve into these germplasm. In addition to sorghum and pearl millet, we also have germplasm collections of finger millet and other millets and little millets, etc. So briefly, as you know, millets, they include a number of small grain cereals or cereal grasses. And in addition to sorghum and millet, you have the other millets, which are finger millet, foxtail millet, kodo millet, proso millet, barnyard millet, and also little millet. So these millets have the advantages of being drought tolerant, and they are of short to medium duration, so you can have a number of crops during a given year. Low labor requirement and input costs, resistant to pests and diseases. And at ICRISAT, we do a lot of work in actually further enhancing their pest and disease resistance, as well as the drought resistance. We have also identified, and it is also now established, that the rich in micronutrients like minerals and B-complex vitamins. In addition to that, they have been established to be low glycemic. Of course, as I speak, I'll tell you that there is a diversity in terms of also the glycemic index, and also there are, the food processing has a major role to play in ensuring that the final end product delivers this glycemic index to the consumer. So these are some of the areas which I will touch upon. Gluten-free is another opportunity of leveraging millets, because they are gluten-free and can be used in developing a number of gluten-free products. And of course, they're rich in health-promoting phytochemicals and bioactives. Let us look quickly at the whole grain concept and what are the benefits of consuming whole grains, which is one of the major reasons why the millets are popular. As you can see here in this particular slide, the whole grain intake actually results because of the bioactive components. You have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity, which results in arresting of tumor growth and cancers. You also can address the cardiovascular diseases, and blood lipids can be lowered. And as I already mentioned, the type 2 diabetes can be handled through intake of whole grains. And of course, dietary fiber also is related to satiety and managing obesity, and managing the satiety leading to reduction in obesity. So all these are a complex network of benefits, health benefits in terms of antioxidants, anti-diabetic, anti-lipidemic, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and antibacterial activities, which have been documented in literature. And this is what the food product developer and the industry needs to leverage on to ensure that you actually benefit from the health benefits or the traits of these whole grains. Coming to the millet processing area, one moment. Yeah, as you can see here, the millet grain can be taken through a number of different processes. You could do a pearling or debranning, conditioning, soaking, and these can further generate different ingredients. In terms of milling, you could get grits and semolina flour, and then you could add different ingredients to them, like milk solids, legumes, eggs, fruit powder, etc., and which can result in different value-added products like composite flour, bakery products, extruded products, breakfast snacks, and a number of traditional products. So as you can see here, there is another category where you could actually develop a number of ready-to-eat and ready-to-cook foods. And then you have the process of germinating and malting, which could result in different other fermented and milk products, including winning and supplementary foods and malted beverages, and different fermented products, which are both innovative, traditional, as well as you could get into innovative product development using these different technologies. Okay, so basically coming to the nutritional and nutraceutical properties of pulses, we also work on pulses, and the pulses form an important part of healthy balanced diet. The pulse starch slowly digestible nature makes them quite friendly in terms of low GI products. Pulses are very high in fiber and contain both soluble and insoluble fibers. And of course, pulses complement well with rice or wheat, and thus providing a nutritionally balanced diet, especially with respect to managing the amino acid profile. And the nutraceutical properties of pulses make them particularly helpful in fighting against a number of communicable diseases similar to that of the millets. And these are the synergistic and can be leveraged as ingredients for different development of different food products. So I'll not go through the detail of these slides, but as you can see, pulses are definitely rich in protein. And there are a number of pulses which we work with. And of course, the functional properties that can be leveraged from pulses is in terms of solubility, water and oil binding capacity, foaming and gelation and viscosity impartment. They have excellent emulsifying properties, and they also have the ability to bind high amounts of water and can be used effectively in controlling the water activity. And thus, pulses play a very important role in product development, and especially in ready-to-eat and ready-to-cook foods where you want to have shelf stability. And this can be actually obtained by incorporation of the right type of starch or starch flour. Well, some of the dietary attributes, briefly touching upon them, which pulses impart, for example, such as weight management, and then management of cardiovascular diseases, as I touched weight, and then you also have the insoluble fiber, which provides the prebiotics for supporting the growth of probiotics. Well, a number of functional flours can be made using millets and pulses, and we have experimented with some of them. As you can see here, you could have sorghum and millet grains, which could then be malted, and these malted grains then can be blended with pulse flour, and you could have a number of different millet and pulse-based functional flours, which can actually be invalidated for the target consumer segment. It could be targeted towards children, where it could be high energy dense flours, or it could also be flours which are targeted towards diabetics with low GI and high protein. So these are some of the products which are possible by blending the millet and pulse flours. In addition, there is a huge opportunity for pulse in product development. For example, development of GI breakfast cereals, development of eggless food formulations, development and enrichment and protein quality in fruit smoothies and vegan products, and of course, malnutrition through addressing malnutrition through development of energy-dense nutrient foods and improvement of texture and color of gluten-free baked and extruded products. So see, these are some of the overall application of pulses. And as you can see here, we could actually have different value-added fractions from pulses. Typically, the pulse can be taken through two processes. One is the dry fractionation and another is the wet fractionation. And as you can see here, dehulled pulses can be directly milled into flour. Dehulled pulses can further be fractionated into starch-rich pulse flour, protein concentrates, and protein isolates. And this is a good opportunity actually to have locally developed pulse fractions, which can then be used for different food applications. So one area which India is lacking is actually the pulse fractions, especially the protein isolates and concentrates from the locally available pulses. And in that area, there is a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurship and getting into new technological innovations. At ICRISAT, we have a huge accession of chickpea. We have the chickpea genomics data, the gene bank, which has around 20,000 accessions. And ICRISAT is working towards improvement of chickpea protein content and quality in chickpea. And this is another area which we are looking to collaborate with the industry. And the germplasm accessions have been identified with protein content as high as 28 to 30%. And this can be used for further developing different high protein varieties. So this work is ongoing, and this is another area which we look forward to collaborating with the industry and the entrepreneurs. As you all know, there is a huge opportunity of using the extrusion technology, and for both for millets as well as for pulses, to develop breakfast cereals, savory snacks, crispy flatbreads, pre-cooked flours, and cereal-based baby foods, texturized proteins and novel protein products, which is actually an area which we are right now exploring, especially trying to see how we could incorporate millets into texturized proteins and get the right texture, and also see that how we could also get the balanced nutritional profile to the consumer. Functional ingredients based on the different properties, benefiting properties of millets and pulses, as well as the functional properties based on their various functional characteristics. And of course, encapsulation of flavors is another area using millet and pulse flour. Some of the proof of concept work which we have already undertaken. This is happening between ICRISAT and the Transdisciplinary Health Science Technology University based at Bangalore. And as you can see here, these are some of our recent experimental samples. The photograph on your left, you can see here, with extruded TVP, which has been developed using finger millet. And also we have further used these TVPs to make plant-based burger patties. And what we note is that incorporation of millet into the finger millet into the burger patties through the TVP we have been able to have overall textural properties and mouthfeel, as well as enhanced nutritional properties of the plant-based burger patties. So this is some work which is already ongoing. And as I told you, we have a huge accession, and within the accession, there's huge diversity. So we are actually working on these different accessions and trying to see how we could identify what are the accessions which give a better quality of the product, of the meat analogs, and then take it further and see how we could scale it up. Yeah, so next, we also have done some of work towards addressing use of pulse towards addressing malnutrition. And we have worked on ready-to-use therapeutic food formulations. And we have also been working with the Integrated Child Development Agency and the Tribal Welfare Department, and a lot of different products based on pigeon pea, chickpea, moong dal, and groundnut have been incorporated and supplied to these different agencies. One challenge is that how do we create a demand pull for these indigenous crops? Unlike wheat and rice, they are not readily accepted by the industry. And that's what we are focusing on. And the demand pull for indigenous crops is linked basically to identification of consumer demand. And of course, we believe that the key consumer demand is health and wellness and malnutrition, which we can leverage on. We would like also to parallelly see how we could develop entrepreneurship around these technologies, so that we could incubate local entrepreneurs, empower women's self-help groups and farmer producer organization, and also ensure inclusiveness and market orientation of the farming communities. Well, I think this is the basic concept, or the basic product development concept, which is linked to consumer satisfaction, which needs to be followed. And here we are talking about starting from the ideation stage, linking to the market, linking to the consumer, getting the ideas, screening the ideas, doing a concept testing, prototyping, and finally delivering the right type of product to the consumer. So basically what we question is, do we have the right product concept, be it a millet-based sorghum or a bread or a cookie? Is it the right concept? Does it deliver what the customer wants? And does the customer actually accept the product? So this should be the questions which we ask as we do the product development. And of course, we then also see a challenge in terms of ensuring the health claims. And that's what I was talking about right in the beginning, that we need to validate the product health claims and understand what are the regulations around those health claims, which we can understand and leverage in terms of actually marketing the product and satisfying the target consumer. For example, gluten-free has to be less than 20 ppm, whereas if you could not achieve gluten-free, you still have the opportunity to work as low gluten, which is between 20 to 100 ppm of gluten. Diabetic friendly, we need to screen for the starch profile of the raw material, as well as also ensure that the end product which we deliver actually has the low glycemic property of the raw ingredient. Of course, there are also claims of antioxidant activities, and we should have the right technology to screen for the high antioxidant millet lines and ensure that this is also delivered to the end consumer. So what are the further bioavailability of micronutrients, especially when we say we want to address malnutrition, anemia, etc. So there could be high iron lines of millets or pulses, but then we need to understand that there is also parallelly anti-nutritional factors in those grains, in those cereals, in those crops, and those need to be understood, and ways of reducing anti-nutritional factors needs to be explored. In terms of shelf life and bioactives, there are issues of rancidity, and appropriate pre-treatments and product packaging needs to be understood as we move along in terms of product development, and the right type of milling technologies also needs to be sort of understood in terms of developing these products. So, and then the right analytical tools should be available to the entrepreneurs. For example, rancidity profiling, nutritional starch fraction assays, in vitro protein digestibility should be undertaken, antioxidant activities should be monitored. And then if we are talking about probiotics and prebiotics, you should have the right tool to understand what is that you're promising and what is that your grains are able to deliver. We also need to understand the proximate analysis, and of course, certain things like rheological properties, viscosities, etc., also needs to be measured. This is an example as we have done for pearl millet, and as you can see here, this is the rancidity profile in terms of acid value and peroxide value. And some lines, basically it tells that some of the lines get rancid very fast, and some of the lines are actually getting rancid very slowly. And this is what is going to make or break your product in the market, in the shelves, because if you choose the wrong grain which gets rancid very fast, your end product would not be in the market, in the shelf for a long time, and then you have a problem there. So understanding the quality of the grain, the quality of packaging, all this needs to be blended together to ensure that you deliver the right type of product in the market. Similarly, this is another study which we have done. In the right, you can see the graph of 3 biscuits which we picked up from the market. And we did what we call the starch digestibility profile, which is directly related to the glycemic response. Lower the content of SDS, or slowly digestible starch, the lower is the glycemic index. And as you can see here, out of the 3 biscuits, which all claim to be millet biscuits, M3 is the one which actually had the lowest slowly digestible starch, which means it would ultimately have the lower glycemic index. So just having millets in the product is not good enough. It is how you process the product and how you actually finally validate the product is what is important. And also understanding the global regulations in terms of what is acceptable in terms of claims is also very important. Another area which we think we should also understand as we try to develop different products is to see if we could actually tap into local food recipes and understand those local food recipes, identify the recipes, document the nutraceutical and health benefits, understand the list of ingredients, what they use, understand those ingredients in terms of their different bioactives, digestibility, protein quality, and then profile them and standardize indigenous products, and then go ahead to the market. So this is another opportunity which we need to sort of leverage on, given that in India and across the globe, especially in African subcontinent, there are a lot of these indigenous foods which have traditionally been claimed as having health benefits, prepared using local ingredients and local crops, but they have not been scientifically validated. And this is another area which we are trying to tap into, to see that we actually take the traditional knowledge and then get into marketable products. These are some of the ready-to-cook food products which we have developed, and as you can see here, they use many of the local ingredients. They have sorghum, chickpea, groundnut. By these combinations, foxtail millet, wheat, and then finger millet. And as you can see here, in terms of the nutritional profile, we are able to give good protein. In fact, if you look at the protein claims, which I'm going to talk about as per the regulations, we are actually able to develop high protein foods because they meet the regulatory requirement in terms of how much protein needs to be delivered per day. And all these actually are made using local ingredients. And also, we are now trying to ensure that we also produce them locally by establishing small-scale food processing units, which are run by local tribal communities. There's some of the other products. So, for example, peanut bars, peanut bar with chickpea, and then we have different cookies and also flakes and other peanut butter-based products, which use all of these are based on local indigenous ingredients. Briefly, I would like to touch on our ongoing work with GFI. We are working on characterizing 3 varieties each of sorghum, pearl millet, and finger millet with the end goal of making a nutritionally superior. So mostly when we talk of nutritionally superior, it is with respect to enhanced protein content and also enhanced content of different micronutrients. We want them to be sensorily acceptable and, of course, cost comparative so that we are able to deliver it to the local population. So we are working on 2 model foods. One is the Indian flatbread, the roti, and the biscuit. And I would just briefly like to share some of the results and the work which we have done till now. So we have actually been able to shortlist a number of finger millet, pearl millet, and sorghum lines, and then screen them and zeroed in on 3 of these lines based on the calcium content for finger millet, protein content on pearl millet, and of course iron content for sorghum. And then based on this, we have now prepared different blends, and these blends are now being used for developing and validating high protein and high micronutrient biscuits and flatbreads. And coming to regulatory, as you can see here, it's very important for us, especially for this project and any project where you do product development, is to understand what are the regulations. And briefly to tell you, for example, if you had to claim a source of protein as per the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, it would be 10%. It would be 10% of the RDA requirement per 100 gram of the product. In the same case, for the US FDA, it would be 20% of RDA per 100 grams. Similarly, for the US FDA, it's 10 to 19% of the daily value. And for a high protein claim, it would be around 20% of RDA for FSSAI and per 100 gram of the product. And for US FDA, it would be 20% more of the daily value per serving. So as you can see here, if you had to get into the US market, your formulation would be different, whereas in the Indian market, your formulation would be very different because your regulations speak quite different conditions for claiming different either a source of protein or high protein. So these regulations are available for other micronutrients. And as an entrepreneur, you need to understand how you could actually use these information to develop different food products. And as you can see here, the different formulations were used to develop different types of products within biscuit and flatbread. And of course, finally, the team was able to narrow down on based on the protein content and the micronutrient content. And as you can see here, out of the 3 blends, they were able to sort of identify blend 4, which had around 17% protein, falling in the high protein category. And of course, they also were able to deliver calcium, which is as a source of calcium. This is the blue is the source. You could not claim a high calcium, but as a source of calcium. Similarly, the product was able to be claimed as a source of iron and of course a source of zinc. So as you can see here, this particular product is a high protein biscuit with a source of calcium, iron, and zinc. So this is how the product would be classified in the market. And if it had to be a high calcium or a high iron product, then the formulation would then change. This is how we would actually go about guiding the entrepreneur to develop different products. Coming to the end of my talk, just briefly, that we have the facility and the expertise in terms of product development, analytical, microbiology, and pilot processing facility. We have expertise in nutritional profiling, product formulation, adhering to FSSAI regulation, shelf life studies, and technologies to manage rancidity in millet-based foods, guiding on labeling as per FSSAI guidelines, health claims for low GI, gluten-free, antioxidant-rich, etc. The validation studies can be undertaken. We undertake collaborative research with the private sector and public sector. And of course, as I talked to you, we do establishment of food processing units and food testing laboratories. So with this, I come to the end of my talk. And we also have a number of publications. And one of these book chapter, which was published around a year back on modern convenient sorghum and millet-based food and beverages and animal feed products. And this also can be shared with you and whoever is interested. And there are also other publications. So I would be happy to be in touch and see how we could leverage on our connect. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saikat, for
thank you,
that very insightful talk. And just to clarify for others also, I had just one quick point, right, around the BMGF project, the Bill and Melinda Gates project that we're doing with ICRISAT funded project on the indigenous crops initiative. So the millets one, for example, as you might have seen, currently we're exploring its application. So firstly, the thing you have to keep in mind is, other than say wheat, soy, and some of the established crops, we do not have a lot of data on genotype, phenotypes, the specific functionality parameters of these millets and other indigenous crops in applications in novel areas, right? Like plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. That's for sure. That kind of studies, that kind of research does not exist at many places. Many people are trying to do it now. So even when we had to decide to start on working on specific application categories, we started with Indian flatbread and biscuit, for example, as you can imagine, because that's where the application, if it's successful, then it becomes possible. So you have to think about the entire value chain. Are there people who are going to take enough concentrates, isolates, or protein flour from the private industry? If not, why would somebody grow them, right? In terms of the challenges, and I'm sure Chirak would be able to speak to some of these challenges in plant-based proteins and the infrastructural challenges that come along with it and the supply challenges that come along with it as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Saikat, for your time.
Thank you.
Any questions that come your way, we'll take in the last 10-15 minutes. So I'll love to invite Chirak. Hi, Chirak. How are you? Good evening.
Hi, Shardul. Hi, everyone. Good evening to everyone here. And thank you, Dr. Saikat.
Wonderful. So just to give you a quick context, everyone who's attending today, Chirak, like I said, has been running a company focusing on ingredients primarily, but a lot of protein-rich crops, a lot of thinking about plant-based fats, ingredient functionality, their applications, their supply chains, their value chains, how to create a B2B venture. And he'll be able to speak to a lot of these things through his talk and through his experiences. So without further delay, Chirak, why don't you quickly set some context to this segment and perhaps go on about sharing some of your learnings through your journey of starting Supplant Foods and B2B plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy space. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Shardul, and thank you to GFI for inviting me to speak to everyone here. Super grateful for the opportunity and excited to learn about what everyone will be working on now and into the future as we all really create the future of food, both here and across the world. And thank you to Dr. Saikat too. That was a super insightful presentation, and it gives, it sets a lot of inspiration to folks like me as well, just because we're in the space, and when we see people with such impressive credentials and work that are working towards this, it gives us a boost as well. So what I'd like to do this evening is just walk everyone through a little bit about the entrepreneurial journey in general, right? What does it take if you're looking at becoming an entrepreneur? And this is a fairly generic view as we see it at Supplant Foods, and as I see it as going through the journey as well. And then through that, navigate towards what it is to be an entrepreneur in the Indian context, in the food, the innovative food context? How does India fit within that? And then round out towards what we're doing at Supplant Foods and give you an insight into how we see the ecosystem here, where it's going, and where the opportunities may lie for you. Dr. Saika pointed out a lot of that already, but maybe a little bit more of this is exactly how one company is doing it kind of perspective. So entrepreneurship, just to start out and just set the tone, entrepreneurship as we see it has a lot of parallels with the research world. And I imagine many of you are researchers. The difference that we see is, in research, you set a hypothesis, and I'm a material scientist by training as well, and then converted towards entrepreneurship. So we used to follow an approach where we would set a hypothesis and then go about running a series of experiments to validate it or invalidate it. In today's day and age, entrepreneurship is very different from the way it was as we hear from 30 years ago, right? Where it was all about knowing people and connections and things. That's still important. But today it's about running a series of experiments. You start with the hypothesis and you keep running your experiments, investing a little bit into them and understanding, does this work? Is there a market? If not, then what do we do? The difference with the research process is that in entrepreneurship, if you find out that your hypothesis is wrong, you quickly pivot, you set another hypothesis and move towards that. And very often you may need to keep doing this until you find one equation or a series of equations that works, and then you start putting more resources into it. So there's a lot of similarity with the whole research process, but there are also some key differences. And it's important to know that. Now, very often you'll hear people say that entrepreneurship can be a lonely journey. And very often it could be. It's kind of, again, like research, right? If you're sitting in the lab by yourself, working away on an experiment and reading books, it can be lonely. But it's a lot more fun when you start bringing together the ecosystem and the team around you. And if you're in the lab, you can go out and talk to some other researchers, gain insights, and that's the cross-pollination of ideas, which is fantastic. That's where I give a lot of credit in our space to GFI for helping bring all of this together. We're not working in silos anymore. We have the benefit of working not only with the knowledge that's coming to us from work that's happening across the world, because it's the interconnectivity, but also folks like Shardul and everyone at GFI are creating an environment for us to cross-pollinate ideas, and that's fantastic. Each of us has strengths and each of us has weaknesses, and how do we go about building the right team where we complement each other's skills? How do we bring the boards of advisors together to say, okay, we got technical and sales skills, but we don't necessarily have financial skills. So how do we bring that together into an entity? And of course, all of this comes after we go through the process of identifying what is it that the market is looking for. What is, I've run my experiments, I'm kind of trying to find out, does this equation work? Does this hypothesis work? Is the customer, is the market looking for what I'm proposing? So as we look at the recipe to success, as I would say, in an entrepreneurial journey, it first starts with, do you have the passion? And then can you build a team around that passion, right? Do you have other people who will join you in that journey? Because it is sometimes a very challenging journey. And as we go on that journey, the first thing I would say is most often people start with, let's build a product and then we'll find the market. And I find that that is not the best approach, right? First, let's go find out what the customer wants. Well, who is our customer and what are they looking for? And what are they looking for, not just now, but what are they going to be looking for 2 to 3 years in the future? How do we meet that customer? Do we need to go to a conference? Do we need to get on phone calls? Do we need to ask Shardul and the other people at GFI to help us get in touch with folks so we can say, what are you struggling with? Where do you see the market going? What are our gut instincts, right? So let's find that product market fit. And once we identify what that is, then let's go build a product. Trust me, I've been there. And the worst thing that can happen to you is you go and build a product and then there's no market for it. It's very exciting to say, okay, we're going to go build this, but it's extremely difficult when you have to then swallow the message saying we built it and now there's no one to buy it. So let's go find who that buyer is first. Let's run those experiments. And once we have that, then let's go build a really kick-ass product that everyone is going to jump on board to support us, where customers are lining up to say, we want this. And then it's very easy to have that conversation with an advisor, because any advisor who's worth it is busy. And because they're busy, they're going to be, they don't want to invest time into a project that's going nowhere. So we need to create those sets of conditions. Investors, everyone wants to raise investment money. So how do we find those investors and convince them that this is the way to go, right? So product market fit, I cannot stress that enough, but we start from there and then we move towards all the other aspects coming together. And all of a sudden, entrepreneurship is not a lonely journey. It's a fun journey that we can all go on together. At this juncture, I think it's also important to spend a minute or two talking about funding. And there's a feeling in the market that funding is the way to go, and we want to raise a lot of capital, and we see how companies are building these big valuations and they're loss-making companies. That's really not, in my opinion, it's not an opportunity that we have in our industry, right? In some industries, you can argue whether it makes sense or not, but in our industry, it isn't. I think our industry is one where, yes, we want to create value, but we need every marginal transaction to be positive and lucrative, especially given the ecosystem we operate in. So we have to find the right type of identity that our firm has. Venture capital money is, big checks and fast growth. But if you're in the ingredient space, you have to ask yourself, is this really what I want? Are these my objectives? Is my objective to go and build a big company quickly and exit? Or is my objective to build something which will yield money and results and allow me to create a better future for the world over time? It's not to say that you cannot do that if you take funding, but it is to say that you are then working with the objectives of your investors as well, as opposed to the passion, as I spoke of in the beginning, and the vision of your core team going into the future. So one of the things we did at Supplant Foods is we've made a pretty conscious call. We're only going to take funding from investors that are going to join us in the ride to create a long-term sustainable future, and we're going to be in this for the long term together. We don't mind if our investors come and go, but we're going to be in it for the long haul, and we've structured the company that way. So another point that I cannot stress enough is go internal into yourself and really ask yourself the question, what am I here for? Am I here to make a name for myself and make, good money and get out? Or am I here to really create a long-term sustainable future? And my sense is that knowing the kind of call we're doing, knowing the GFI group over here and some of the other information that we've discussed, most of the people here are not here for a quick buck. Most people are here to create long-term sustainable value. And the jury is out to say what the best type of funding is going to be for this kind of sector. So it's a lot of theory. I hope some of it is useful. What I'd like to do now is just go into the landscape within India, speak a bit about that in terms of venture building, some of the opportunities and challenges, and then talk to you a little bit more about how Supplant has gone about it. So India is a very
perfect setting for the session, Chirag. And I think where you're going is also quite relevant. I had a couple of DMs around the same, so I guess you're kind of covering that now in terms of specific challenges in India. So thank you so much. Just wanted to add that in. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So the landscape in India is extremely different from the way it is in other parts of the world. And I'm going to start first by looking at the market and then working back towards everyone's challenge as an entrepreneur as they get into this. So the Indian market is extremely fragmented. And I get, questions from business partners all the time in different parts of the world saying, how do we get into India and build distribution? This is for CPG companies, mind you. This is for finished products. And it's always, you have to educate them and say, look, if you're in North America, you need to have 5 conversations which go well. So if you have a really great product and good product market fit, you need to have 5 conversations to get access to $500 billion of market access, right? Which is half the size of the grocery market in the US. In India, that's very different. Companies will spend decades building distribution over here. So distribution plays an outsized role in terms of the success or failure of a venture. That's the first point. Bringing that back into what are some of the challenges over here, the result of this is very often the products that succeed, and this is a global phenomenon, but it's more so here, are the products that have distribution versus the products that are the best products out there. which is where collaborations, alliances, and product market fits become extremely important. And I would encourage everyone here to think about that in their context of building the venture. Bring that now one step back into what it takes to build your team, and in order to build your product, to do your R&D, it's going to be really important for you to identify where is the market going, what are some of the challenges, how do we get connected with some of the key decision makers, and how do we impress upon them that our solution is the best. This goes all the way down to fundamentally what ingredients are we developing, what are the costs of ingredients, what are the technologies behind ingredients, and how do we then put them together into a package which is compelling for the market. I think an example over here is relevant. So when we look at, for instance, some of our ingredient range, right? We know that it is very suitable for people that are towards the top end of the market in India and people that are in other parts of the world. But it's not really relevant for the majority of customers in India because the price points just don't work. A lot of the criteria that we are hitting on, which is clean label, for instance, greater function, it's just not a market that's mature in India. And we see that this market will come. We've built for that market, but we're not there yet. So we've built the product and we're focusing on international distribution as opposed to focusing here. However, a lot of the key pillars that will make your venture relevant or not over here is aligning with the consumer. And the consumer thinks about taste and price in the Indian market, and then they think about nutrition, but nutrition is becoming more and more important. So as you build your products, as you build your venture, how do you bring that together? So that's, I think, in terms of the market dynamics and how you would fit within there, how your products, whether an ingredient or a finished product, would fit within that. You need to think about that. Now, in terms of actually building for this ecosystem or building within this ecosystem, if you look at the pace at which developments are happening in the plant-based world in other parts of the world, it's moving very fast. Singapore, for instance, is a great place where if you are able to spend time, you'll be meeting a lot of the relevant players very quickly. And it takes 45 minutes to go from one part of Singapore to the other. In India, very often, and this is something I know GFI is supporting with, is we're having conversations about, well, you know, if there isn't a facility that does this, or if there is a facility, how do we know it's working? And I have to fly to that facility in one part of India and then find out the machine is not working, and then go to another part of India and find out that the machine may not be there. So there's a lot of a disconnect over here, which makes things challenging. And like I said, I know I've been on calls with GFI to see that we can start unwinding that, and the government is putting its weight behind it in order to move that forward. Some of the ingredients we have over here, unfortunately, as Dr. Saikat says, you know, the capabilities that we have in India for dry fractionation or protein isolation are zero. Forget insignificant. They're in many cases zero. So how do we get the right ingredients made indigenously, or the right technologies to convert ingredients indigenously into the products that we need to formulate? So these challenges are still there. They're not long-term challenges. These challenges will work their way through the system, and there's a lot of impetus to make that happen, but we're facing them right now. So when you, again, going back to the start, set your passion, set your resolve, and set your decision in order to go down this path, you have to be aware of these challenges and know that you're going to ride the wave. You have to get all the people you're working with aligned with you to say, you know what, every journey has its own challenges. These are our challenges, and we're going to be committed to it. So I'd like for everyone to be aware of that. It's very exciting to say we're going to build a plant-based venture, but when you are doing things, as has been said by someone very wise, with one hand tied behind your back, it becomes frustrating. So be aware of what you're getting into. Shardul, any specific points you want me to touch on for the aspect of the challenges of the Indian ecosystem?
Yeah, so one thing could be, so for example, a lot of times people are thinking about, there's this common example, right, that Eat Just uses mung bean protein. And only if, you know, somebody starts, for example, isolating mung bean protein isolates or concentrates in India, and then starts applying what would be the practical challenges of going on about such a theoretical idea, right? In terms of establishing those supply chains and then understanding the domestic market, its use in the domestic market. Is it overly dependent on the exports market? Are there challenges with exports? I guess if you can talk a little bit more about similar use cases, not just, mung bean protein, chickpea protein, other millets and pulses. Yeah.
Sure. So my opinion of it there, and this might just be my opinion, is I think we need to understand that, again, we have a different ecosystem over here, and leaning on an international ecosystem or the events happening over there is good, but over relying on that is not. Because, for instance, Eat Just has a very expensive raw material, not just mung, but it's a fractionated part of the protein. And so it's expensive in terms of the raw material and the process as well. And that becomes irrelevant for India. So as we look to Just, I would say the best way to think about it is they set the benchmark, they set a target. However, their product doesn't fit within this market. So how do we actually build for the local market? And again, to your point, Shardul, that starts with, I have a goal to make a plant-based egg over here. It's a huge market opportunity, but how do I then develop the ingredients in order to get there in an affordable manner? And when we really dive into the research, there are so many different approaches, ranging from microalgae to what we are doing, which is flours, in order to give the same kind of textures and compositions on the mouthfeel and in terms of the finished product. So I think we need to look at the international market setting the benchmark in terms of this is the finished form factor, perhaps. How do we adapt that form factor to the local market? And how do we use indigenous ingredients in a context that makes sense to get to that goal, right? It's very different from saying, I just want to copy what they're doing. I want to copy what they're doing works for a short period of time, but it's not a long-term solution. It's a recipe to say, I've got investors who want me to push a product out into the market. So I'll just copy for a little while, and then I'll burn money while I'm doing that so I can get some market share. And then I have to figure a local solution because I cannot burn money forever. And indeed, that is where the market is so young. It is so open at the moment. If you come up with the right solution today, you will be able to scale very quickly and awaken that market. It's better to spend your money on that as opposed to selling a product at a loss because you feel you want to get a foot in the door. That's my position on that. Now, when we look at exports, I think it's a huge opportunity. This is where I wanted to go with it in terms of, I pointed out some of the challenges. Now I want to look at the opportunity. One of the things that the Indian government has done extremely well is maintain that we have non-GMO crops in India. And the whole market that is in this space is looking for non-GMO products. And we also have incredible biodiversity. India is a breadbasket. And it is up to us. It is up to us as the innovators to look at those raw materials and value add to them, to bring them into a new light, to make them everything that they can be, so that we can create the future of food. We have a long legacy of vegetarian eating in this country, and we have an incredible diversity across it. What can we now do to standardize and elevate those ingredients to help create the future of food? What we eat today is not going to be what we eat 15 years from now. And we have a role to play in there. And if we can develop the right technologies, the right processing, that becomes our opportunity. Yes, there are supply chain challenges. Yes, there are technology challenges, but I believe those are going to be solved within the next 3 to 4 years at best. You guys need to figure out, you guys and girls need to figure out, how are you going to weather that storm for the next 3 to 4 years potentially, and they might be faster, right? Shardul may have a different view in terms of it may go faster. How are you going to weather that storm of what you're going to do in your life and how you're going to build these ventures in order to get to that point where things then start going explosive and exponential? Is that even for you? These are all very personal questions, but you have to ask those questions to yourself, because when you have that internal conviction, you can face the realities and then be part of creating the future here. So those are my thoughts on, entrepreneurship in general, where we are at with the Indian ecosystem. What are some of the challenges over here? Where are the opportunities internationally? I talk to buyers all the time. We have a very successful business with buyers internationally. They are constantly looking at India as the opportune supply source. A lot of our companies, unfortunately, have not done the right things in the past in terms of respecting suppliers and providing innovative ingredients, but that's exactly where our opportunity is, right? You guys and girls will have the benefit of companies like mine having done the work to convince international buyers that look at India, we can do innovative stuff here. So you will have that benefit now because buyers are now looking here. So the opportunity is there. And a lot of those folks are willing to pay for value provided they can see it. So the opportunity is there for you. I'd like to transition over quickly to what we're doing at Supplant, and I know we're a little bit tight on time, so I'll keep it brief.
No, that should be okay. Take your time. We have time. Yeah. Go
okay,
on.
Great. So at Supplant, we have created a technology in which we can take, again, Indian crops, and it's not just limited to Indian crops, right? We're taking crops from around the world, and we are able to, now this is a product market fit. We realized that everyone wanted to have beef-flavored and highly functional versions of flours. Protein isolates are great. They're unsustainable. They're extremely expensive. Protein concentrates are a step in the right direction, but if we can do it with flours, that's going to be wonderful. The problem with bean-like flours, like chickpea, for instance, which is a crop that we use, is they carry a very strong flavor, and the functionality is also limited. And unless you isolate the protein, you really can't do much with it until you have our technology. So our technology takes beans, chickpea, we've done it with navy bean, we've done it with a bunch of other ingredients, mung as well, and we are able to remove all the flavor from it, in addition to the fact that there are a lot of biomolecular inhibitors to the function of the protein, and we're able to get them out. And when we get them out, you have great protein functionality, in addition to the fact that you have clean flavor. So now a formulator, a person developing a product for a CPG company, examples in India would be Britannia, ITC, so on and so forth. These companies are able to say, wow, we can now use more chickpea. And they get, as Dr. Saikat was saying, they get more access to nutrition in the product, they get better functionality, they get the vegan aspect of it as well, which is very important, especially because now they're not leaning on animal-derived products to say, we need this in order to get functionality, right? We're able to get it with a vegan ingredient that is affordable, that is tasty, and it's nutritious. And so we're going to try and use as much of this as possible. Like I said, it's a patent pending technology. We've developed it over here in India, again, where we've been talking about some of the challenges to get things done, but we've done it over here, and we're now taking it to the world. And we have companies in North America that are tying up with us to take our technology and license it over there. So this is where I see it's an extremely opportune time in India. We have the raw materials and resources over here. We have the skill sets over here. And now, thanks to groups like GFI, we are unlocking the will of the government and unlocking the access to capital as well, in order to completely support this industry so that we can be at the heart of it as the world changes its form of eating. I'd like to stop here so that we can take more questions. Shardul, if you wanna dive deep into what we're doing at Supplant, I'm happy to do that. But I wanted to set the context for everyone.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I think starting with the Q&A bit, Dr. Saikat and Chirak, we can have your videos on. My apologies, my internet's a little weak, so my video's not on. But just starting with Chirak and what you were talking about, specifically your work of extracting protein and removing beanie or planty aftertaste from your protein sources. A question from Yadaditya is around this, about beanie and planty aftertaste being a key issue with a lot of these ingredients. And you talked about, your patent pending technology, but perhaps in general, if you can talk a little bit about the key parameters that one should consider while removing these aftertaste in the end products, and what and I know it goes all the way to, genotype and phenotyping. Perhaps Dr. Saikat would add a lot of those insights on this question as well, but starting with you, Chirak.
Sure, absolutely. So, I don't go that far into the actual, the genotypes, but I would say when you look at it from a very practical perspective, and that's my vantage point, right? My co-founder is the technical partner, but when you look at it from a very practical perspective, when I'm giving a formulator something to work with, if they are going to find that there are bad flavors in there, my product goes straight in the trash. They don't even bother. And especially when we're talking to billion-dollar companies, they have 20 companies globally approaching them every day. how are you going to be that company that rises to the top? So you got to promise something that is impressive, and you got to be able to deliver. So that from an entrepreneurship perspective, you need to be really particular about your quality controls, about your delivery, because people are going to invest in those relationships, and you're going to invest in it too. So leaving, the technical aspects aside, and I'm sure Dr. Saikat will have, a lot of things to say there. You need to make sure that your product gets to the target, and that's super important.
Makes sense. So, like Dr. Saikat, the same question to you. Beanie aftertaste, planty aftertaste.
Yeah.
What are some key scientific parameters to keep in mind while working on these kind of crop sources to make sure that the end product does not have that? And millets, usually it's also a problem. So I'm sure you worked on quite a bit of these things.
Well, I would just come back from the consumer and see when it goes to the consumer will not accept anything which doesn't suit the consumer palate. And indirectly, it will affect the company which supplies the material. So as a product developer, as a company, we need to see what are the technologies available, number one. Number two, are those technologies affordable? It should not jack up the end product cost, the ingredient cost. So when you suppose you say, I'm going to use a particular genotype, fine, if it is readily available, if it is commercially available, because you also need to look at the supply chain, whether the farmer is growing it or not. So all those come into play. And of course, yes, technologies are there, which you have to judiciously explore and then utilize them. But I think at the end of the day, you should ensure before you get into the market that you have done a proper market research and a proper consumer tasting or acceptance study, so that the product meets the requirement of the consumer and the industry. So that's how I would summarize that. And to do that, whatever technology or technology help or technology ecosystem is available near you, you should try and access that. That's how I would summarize this. Yeah.
Makes sense, Dr. Saikat. Would you perhaps want to further deep down a little bit on the technologies that are available for removing off flavors, or what kind of parameters should a researcher or a scientist keep in mind while working with these crops, or at least communicating with, say, researchers or academicians who are working on these crops?
There are different types of technologies. So you could go for distillation or solvent extraction, or there are a lot of other different technologies. So the technologies also, you could also innovate. So you could marry two different technologies and come up with something which is cost effective. So that comes down specific to the particular product and the particular way you approach the technology. So I would not go down and say, okay, these are but there are generic technologies which are available. You could go to supercritical carbon dioxide extraction also. So there are a huge range of technologies. But then it all boils down to cost and how effective it is in terms of maintaining your end product quality and cost effectiveness. Yeah.
Absolutely, Dr. Saikat. I was actually speaking with one of the participants from our cohort day before yesterday, and they are working with supercritical fluid extraction for cleaner wet extraction processes and removing off layers. So very relevant, and I think it all depends on the context of what applications you have, what crops you're working with. So I think that general guideline would help people think better about it. The next question, again, first for Chirag, and then perhaps you can have Dr. Saikat give his views on it. The questions from Yadaditya. Most of the plant-based meat startups currently are using artificial flavors and ingredients like methyl cellulose, food colorants in their products, where the demand is obviously for cleaner label products. And we keep hearing about it. But what are some actual steps one can do as an entrepreneur in India, given our advantages, disadvantages, to offer for better clean label products, and perhaps using not ingredients like methyl cellulose, etc. And I know you talk a lot about methyl cellulose, Chirag, so it'll be a specifically relevant question for you.
Well, I would just say when you find the answer, or when anyone here finds the answer to that, come and contact me and let's go build $1 billion company, because everyone's looking for that answer. No, I think, again, because we have such unique biodiversity, there's an opportunity here. And the same opportunity exists in other places. We know people in Brazil are working on it. We know some folks in Europe are working on it. So I think the opportunity it's a global opportunity with different folks having different aspects to strength. I think as we look at the spectrum and, again, the future of food, do we have all the answers over here? Maybe not. maybe we still need to import some things. And that's where the government opening up to the sector is going to be very important. But then as we look at certain opportunities, right? Leave methyl cellulose aside, as you said, there are artificial flavors in the product too. And maybe there are certain molecules that are accessible through plants in India, which can help us get natural forms to those molecules and be cost effective. So when we find those answers, they're going to be answers that exist for the long term. And like I said, you know, we're very well connected in the market, so we know who to take them to and how to take them. So again, it's just an exciting time within the entire marketplace.
Absolutely. Dr. Saikat, any thoughts on that?
Well, when it comes to looking for replacements of especially a label which is natural and try to replace some of the synthetic chemicals and flavors, I think one approach would be to try and network with the universities, both locally and globally, and see what the researchers have already. There may be some low-hanging fruits which needs to be refined. So I think that's one approach to go ahead with, because these are all things which are which has to be built over a period of time. And sometimes you need to do some sort of intelligent diving into data and find out what could fit in where, both in the space of, say, food, it comes both in the space of food ingredients as well as botanicals. So I think that's something you need to have a strong scientific team doing the work for you, or on your own, or network to find out what could be done. So that's the other way to look at it. Yeah.
Makes sense. The next question is from Abhirami. Abhirami, the context is relatively missing from what you've submitted. So let me allow you to talk, and perhaps you can ask your question live. But it has something to do with the interaction of different blends of proteins and the functionality that gets affected when you're mixing two or more sources of proteins and in the processing. But Abhirami, would you like to ask it?
Hi, I actually wanted to ask if you are blending 2 or 3 protein sources from 2 or 3 protein sources, you are creating a protein isolate. Will the function of a particular protein, so from a source of protein, will be affected by the other?
So Dr. Saikat, perhaps you would like to take this.
Well, see, I think whether if you are blending protein from 2 or different sources, definitely there would be certain interactions which are happening. But as long as you are able to deliver what you aim to deliver in terms of the functionality or in terms of the amino acid profile, it should not bother you. So as long as you are able to deliver, I don't think you should bother about too much about what's happening. But of course, you would be measuring certain parameters. For example, whether the solubility is getting affected, or whether the pH is changed, or whether the protein after blending precipitates out when you're trying to make a soluble beverage or whatever. So those things need to be considered. And as you do those, you will understand that, yes, this is something which is positive or it doesn't work. So I think that's how you'd approach this particular problem. Yeah.
Makes sense.
I hope it answers. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. It does. And Chirak, just for the same question, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure many people are thinking about synergistic blends, right? But rapid prototyping is a problem in itself, given that, you know, some people are exploring AI, ML to understand a lot of data sets around functional properties. Sometimes those are missing. So you have to actually work and do experiments in lab. They take a lot of months to do. So what would be your insights for researchers and entrepreneurs who are thinking of combining different blends? What works, what doesn't work, maybe from your experiences? Yeah,
I think the opportunity here is rapid prototyping. Yes, takes time, but we also have the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? I mean, we have a lot of folks, great developers across the world that have been reading and developing and playing around with formulas, publishing patents for the last, in this space, 4 to 5 years. So when we start at an advantage point. It's not to say that we don't have to rapid prototype, but where we would have had to do everything from 0 to 100, now maybe we're sitting at a point at 60. And from 60, we can very quickly go to 80. From 80 to 100, that's exactly where the work needs to be done. And this is where I feel it's not just about published information, but as Dr. Saikat said, it's about collaborations with universities, collaborations with developers, so that we are all cross-pollinating that knowledge and we're able to make progress. And ultimately, the good thing about this is that we're not necessarily in a stage of competition. We're in a stage of collaboration within the industry because there's just so much work to be done. There's enough scope for everyone to build very successful ventures. So let's collaborate and help each other as opposed to let's compete. There will be a time that we will start competing in the industry, but this is not the time. This is the time where we will build together.
Absolutely. It's a pre-competitive industry, and we keep stressing on the importance of collaboration on research, on understanding the key white space opportunity areas between academicians and entrepreneurs, between entrepreneurs, and also B2C versus B2B entrepreneurs. I think it's all kind of essential, and hopefully people who are working on smart protein as part of the ISPIC cohort are able to collaborate with each other, at least in the years going ahead. Having said that, so that is also a big kind of an indication of you should be connecting to people who've participated last year in the challenge, right? And perhaps start understanding what their work has come to be in the past 1 year, what learnings they've had, what might be the best ways of collaborating with them, not just them, but also the larger smart protein ecosystem that we have built in India. I guess the participants should also be thinking about reaching out to people like Chirak, not necessarily just Chirak, others as well in the ecosystem. But I'm sure Chirak would be happy to hear from you as well. Having said that, my next question is actually for the equipment and infrastructure support. Now, we often hear, this is an example, Dr. Saikat and Chirak, for example, we use millets with larger food processing or food manufacturers for making biscuits or breads, or any of these flatbreads, but ultimately they are used to a setup which is catering to wheat flour, right? And sometimes changes with indigenous crops or the flour that indigenous crops, whatever the temperature parameters, processing parameters, might be too inconvenient for them to give out a small kind of introduction to, say, millet breads or millet biscuits as part of their offerings. What are those kind of challenges we're talking about, and how can we reduce those as smart protein entrepreneurs? Because to begin with, the plant-based meat, eggs and dairy production volumes might not be as big. So, and people still want to work on indigenous crops. So any advice around that, maybe starting with Dr. Saikat and then going on to Chirak?
Yes, Shardul. So I think that's a very appropriate question. And this is a challenge which I've been working in this millet space for the past 12 years. And this challenge still is there, especially with respect to milling and trying to get the right sort of grades of millet. Unlike wheat, where you can go to different levels of grading, this has not been possible yet. Of course, we have been able to develop a few machinery which is available with us, and we can now go to a particular level of different grades. But this challenge is there, and even if you have these millet supply chain, if you look at it, they are not large mills which do this production. So yeah, that back end has to be developed, and we are working on that. And of course, if there are opportunities for people to actually get into that space where if they have certain expertise in development of machinery for millet processing and other similar processing, that should be explored. And that's how I would say is a huge entrepreneurial opportunity again. But at this moment, the challenge is still there, and we are depending on the wheat milling or the rice milling industry to provide this support. Yeah, that's how I would like to summarize this. Yeah.
Noted. For attendees, a thing to keep in mind is in a country like India, even customized agriculture equipments are of huge white space, right? Within that, for example, now we're talking about indigenous crops and milling and processing equipment for it. That's, like Dr. Saikat said, a huge opportunity area again for people from agriculture engineering, mechanical engineering, food engineering backgrounds to kind of think about and really create startups around. Having said that, maybe other than millets, what would you say, Chirak, for other indigenous crops? Are there significant challenges for processing and milling, or is it similar to the problem with millets?
Well, I mean, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, what do you mean by processing? If we're just talking about processing in a traditional context, I don't see there being any shortage of capacity here. But when we talk about specific processing, like what we do, where we have, patent pending technology, yeah, I mean, we have to invest, we have to put up facilities, and we have to see how those facilities fit within context of best practices. So, it creates the need for funding for many people. However, if you're going to go to a manufacturer in India and tell them you need to set up unique equipment, unless their whole business is built around your ingredient and around what you're bringing to the table, forget about it. You're never, like, as a young company, you do not have the pull or sway to walk into Britannia or any of these other companies and say, here's our unique, wonderful ingredient. Please invest in facilities so you can process it correctly. You'll have a very polite 30-minute meeting with them and goodbye. They'll never give you a meeting again. So when we develop for that industry or for any industry, we have to keep in mind their best practices, and their best practices have been built over decades. And we have to respect those best practices. They're there for a reason. That's not to say that they're optimal and that they cannot be made better, but it is to say we have to come from a place of humility and from a place of understanding that they know what they're doing. They know their market, and they built very successful businesses doing this. So if we come onto the block as the new company with an innovative ingredient, we need to be at least as good, which means that whether it's performance or price, something that we are bringing, or market fit, something we're bringing to the table has to justify them putting in the effort. Because you know what, everyone's busy. And if we try and impose on somebody to do something because it's good for us and not good for them, good luck, you'll have lots of very short meetings. So, we have to give them something of compelling value. We have to fit within their ecosystem.
Makes sense. Yeah. One last set of questions before we kind of close down the webinar, and we are kind of almost there with our time, is around the use of microalgae along with other plant protein isolates as a possible source for making plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy products. So I'll recommend Yadadya and Kavinya, you've asked questions about omega-3 fatty acid and other such indigenous crop sources and microalgae kind of isolates. So definitely go through some of the resources we have around this, including the strategic analysis of microalgae and seaweed and fungi, which would help you understand a lot about this a bit better. But I love quick thoughts from Chirag and Dr. Saikat as well. So Chirag, any thoughts on use of microalgae as protein source?
Nothing specific in particular. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about it, and I think it's an exciting space. I see the opportunity over there to hit all the key parameters. Until we see something that is concrete, it sounds like it just sounds very promising. So we'd like to see something concrete, and then we can evaluate the product market fit.
Makes sense. Dr. Saikat.
Yeah, so definitely, as far as microalgae is concerned, they are highly nutritious. They have different bioactive components, and that's probably one of the reasons, or maybe the functionality itself. So if it is the functionality, yes, if it gives a specific functionality, use it and ensure that it delivers in the final product, sustains the processing steps. And of course, if you're trying to say that it brings in certain health benefits or nutritional properties or certain micronutrients or bioactives, then you need to ensure that the raw material sustains the processing and the final product is validated for those health claims. So that's how I look at it. Use it, but see for what you're using, what's your end reason for using it and what you want to deliver. And have it scientifically validated that, yes, if I'm saying it brings in some bioactive component or an antioxidant property, then it should be sustaining the processing and have in the final end product. So product validation is very important irrespective of what ingredient you use. And if it doesn't sustain the processing, then I don't think it makes sense to use it. But if it does, and if it delivers, and if it is cost effective, please go ahead and use it. Yeah, that's my.
Perfect. Yeah, makes sense. One last question to Dr. Saikat before we kind of close down the webinar. It's around the training that ICRISAT is able to offer around the use of functional ingredients and the applications and extraction before, say, an entrepreneur or a researcher who wants to be an entrepreneur wants to set up a processing facility. If they want to come and understand the technology, the science, are there such kind of training programs or incubation programs that ICRISAT offers? Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so we have our own incubation facility where entrepreneurs go through. They do get registered and undergo incubation specific to the project they want to develop. Sometimes they come with project concepts and we help them develop the project concept. Sometimes they already have a concept and want to refine it. So we could take them to the refinement and then handhold them towards product development. And then also there's another team which supports them in terms of marketing and business plan development. And of course, in terms of training, we do have lab facility, which is accessible to the entrepreneur, to the industry, where they can come and set up their experiments. We also have the opportunity to entrepreneurs to come and set up their labs, R&D labs within the facility. So lab space is also available. And along with that, the technical support would also be made available. So that's the level of sort of ecosystem we have, which can be provided to the entrepreneurs and also to the industry. Yeah, I hope that is good enough, Shardul. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the person who asked that can also further connect with Dr. Saikat if you have anything specific in mind. But having said that, thank you so much once again. So Chirak from Supplant Foods and Dr. Saikat Mazumdar from ICRISAT joined us today and shared a lot of the insights. And I personally believe that indigenous crops and the kind of offerings that India can have for the global market is a huge opportunity area, one true opportunity area where our country has natural moats and, the ecosystem kind of exists. A lot of research has been happening in agricultural colleges and, obviously excellent institutes like ICRISAT on some of these areas. It's just time for entrepreneurs to understand, connect the dots, perhaps create commercial ventures around these crops and, find applications of these crops like Chirag is trying to do. So it was a good session that way. And thank you so much once again for joining us. If there are any parting thoughts, I'd love, a couple of sentences from each one of you, and then we can close down the webinar. Chirag and Dr. Saikat.
Dr. Saikat?
Yeah, so I think, thank you, GFI, and ICRISAT is there because of the entrepreneurs and the industry. So we are not a commercial organization, and this is a huge opportunity for us to tell you what we are there for, and we are looking for partnerships and supporting entrepreneurs. So please feel free to get in touch with me, and let's collaborate to make this good thing happen, which GFI is trying to promote. So that's my last thoughts on this. And over to you, Shardul and Chirag. Yeah.
And to echo Dr. Saikat's comments as well, thanks to GFI for organizing this. It's an exciting time for everyone to partake. Like I said in the beginning, my only thing is look internally first and realize why you're doing this. And that will guide you through all the challenges and opportunities that come along. And it's going to be a fun ride for everyone that decides that this is where they want to be. So yep, looking forward to the next few years and what we're going to do together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And people who have loved the session, really glad to know that you found it useful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chirag and Dr. Saikat. Have a great day.